Every single parent knows the weight of protecting their child's dreams, while the world judges them for what they lack. Daniel Ashford stood at the marble entrance of the prestigious Whitmore Academy's annual charity gala, clutching his daughter's acceptance letter and wearing a borrowed tuxedo that didn't quite fit. Inside, Vivian Sterling, daughter of tech billionaire Helena Sterling, was about to make a bet that would expose the ugly truth about high society's prejudices. She wagered that this working-class single father would embarrass himself so thoroughly at their exclusive event that her mother would finally abandon her diversity initiative at the academy. But Vivian had no idea she was about to witness a masterclass in dignity that would transform not just one evening but the entire culture of Meridian Heights' elite society. Before we dive into this incredible transformation, tell us in the comments what you think true class really means, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's story will absolutely blow your mind. The morning sun filtered through the small windows of Daniel Ashford's apartment above Rodriguez Corner Market in the Riverside district of Meridian Heights, where he had been working double shifts for the past 3 years. The cramped two-bedroom space bore the marks of a man doing everything he could to provide for his daughter while maintaining their dignity. Second-hand furniture arranged with care, hand-me-down clothes pressed to perfection, and a small shelf lined with academic achievement awards that told the story of a brilliant child whose potential far exceeded their circumstances. His 15-year-old daughter Grace emerged from her room, her Whitmore Academy uniform pristine despite being purchased from the school's gently used program. The prestigious boarding school's navy blazer with its golden crest looked as elegant on her as it did on the children of senators and celebrities. But Marcus knew the difference. Helena had earned her place through pure academic excellence, scoring in the 99th percentile on entrance exams that most students prepared for, with $200 per hour tutors. "Papa, you don't have to come tonight," Grace said softly, adjusting her father's tie with the careful precision she brought to everything in her life. "I know the gala makes you uncomfortable, and honestly, some of the other parents." She trailed off, but Daniel understood. He had seen the looks, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, felt the subtle ways people created distance between themselves and the custodian's widowed son, who somehow belonged in their world. Daniel had lost his wife Evelyn 3 years ago to cancer, a battle that had consumed their savings and left him with medical debt that would take decades to repay. Evelyn had been the educated one, the former university professor who spoke 4 languages and could discuss philosophy with the same ease she brought to helping Grace with calculus. She had been their bridge to the world Grace now inhabited, and without her, Daniel often felt like an imposter in spaces where his daughter clearly belonged. But Grace belonged at Whitmore Academy, and Daniel would not let his own insecurities rob her of the opportunities she had earned. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days maintaining the luxury office buildings where people like the Sterlings made their fortunes, yet his daughter was intellectually superior to most of their children. Grace had taught herself 3 programming languages, 1 state science fairs, and written poetry that had been published in national literary magazines. Her acceptance to Whitmore hadn't been about connections or donations. It had been about pure merit. The Whitmore Academy's annual spring gala represented everything that intimidated Marcus about his daughter's new world. Held at the exclusive Grandview estate overlooking the city's harbor, the event attracted tech moguls, politicians, entertainment industry leaders, and old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. Tickets cost $5,000 per couple, though scholarship families like the Thorns received complimentary invitations as part of the school's community engagement initiative. Marcus had been dreading the event for weeks, knowing that his presence would be tolerated rather than welcomed. He had borrowed a tuxedo from his supervisor at the cleaning company, spent his lunch breaks watching YouTube videos about formal dining etiquette, and practiced conversations in the mirror to prepare for inevitable questions about his work and background. Catherine had always handled these social situations with natural grace, her education and cultural knowledge making her comfortable in any setting. Without her, Marcus felt exposed and vulnerable. The invitation itself had been a source of anxiety. Printed on heavy cardstock with elegant calligraphy, it requested the pleasure of your company for an evening of celebrating excellence and fostering community among the Whitmore Academy family. The dress code was black tie, and the suggested donation was whatever feels comfortable, though Marcus had overheard other parents discussing contributions that exceeded his annual salary. What Daniel didn't know was that his attendance had already become a topic of conversation among certain members of Meridian Heights' social elite. Vivian Sterling, a senior at Whitmore and daughter of tech CEO Helena Sterling, had been vocal about her opposition to the school's recent efforts to diversify its student body and parent community. At 17, Vivian possessed the casual cruelty that often accompanied inherited privilege, and she viewed scholarship students like Grace as charity cases who diminished the exclusivity that made Whitmore special. Vivian had convinced several of her friends that Daniel Ashford's presence at the gala would provide the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why people like that didn't belong in their world. She had crafted an elaborate scheme designed to expose what she assumed would be his ignorance of proper etiquette, cultural knowledge, and social graces. The plan involved strategically engineering situations where Daniel would be expected to navigate complex social protocols, discuss topics requiring broad cultural literacy, and demonstrate the kind of refined behavior that Vivian believed could only be acquired through generations of privilege. The bet Vivian had made with her inner circle was simple. By the end of the evening, Daniel Ashford would have embarrassed himself so thoroughly that her mother would be forced to acknowledge the failure of Whitmore's diversity initiative. Vivian was confident that exposing one scholarship parent's social inadequacy would provide the ammunition needed to return Whitmore to its traditional exclusivity. What Vivian failed to understand was that true class had nothing to do with wealth, breeding, or social position. It was rooted in character, empathy, and the kind of quiet dignity that Daniel had learned through years of facing adversity with grace. Evelyn had taught him that respect was earned through actions rather than inherited through circumstance, and that genuine refinement came from treating every person with kindness regardless of their station in life. As Daniel helped Grace with her coat that evening, preparing to enter a world where he would be judged by standards he had never been taught, he carried with him the values that his late wife had cherished: integrity, humility, and the unshakable belief that a person's worth wasn't determined by their bank account or family name. He had no idea that these very qualities, which Vivian Sterling viewed as weaknesses, were about to teach Meridian Heights elite society a lesson in what true nobility actually looked like. The taxi ride to Grandview Estate felt like a journey to another planet, with Daniel watching Grace practice her French pronunciation for a presentation she would give the following week. His daughter's brilliance never ceased to amaze him, but tonight it also reminded him of the gulf between her intellectual gifts and his own humble background. As they approached the grand entrance where valets waited to take keys from luxury vehicles, Daniel took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever challenges Vivian Sterling and her privileged world would throw at him. He had no way of knowing that by the end of the evening he would transform not just how people saw him but how they understood the very meaning of grace under pressure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning routine at the Ashford household revealed the quiet dignity that would soon astonish Meridian Heights' elite. Daniel moved through their modest apartment with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to make every moment count. At 5:30 a.m., he was already preparing Grace's breakfast while reviewing her academic schedule, ensuring her uniform was perfectly pressed, and mentally rehearsing the demanding day ahead. Grace settled at their small kitchen table, surrounded by advanced calculus textbooks and college-level literature that told the story of a mind far beyond her years. Despite attending the most prestigious academy in the state, she never complained about their circumstances or showed embarrassment about their humble home. Instead, she approached each day with the same thoughtful consideration she brought to solving complex equations. "Papa, Mrs. Wellington asked me to translate some documents from French to English for the International Relations Club," Grace said, spreading papers across the table with careful organization. "She said my translation work was more sophisticated than what they typically receive from graduate students." Daniel paused in his morning prep, watching his daughter work through multilingual documents with the same ease most teenagers brought to social media. Grace had inherited her mother's gift for languages, but she had developed something even more valuable through their years of facing adversity together: an intuitive understanding of how to navigate complex situations with grace and intelligence. The contrast between their morning routine and the luxury surrounding Grace's classmates was stark, but it had taught both father and daughter lessons that money couldn't buy. Every decision required careful consideration. Every opportunity had to be maximized. Every interaction mattered because they couldn't afford to waste chances that others took for granted. Daniel's workday began at Rodriguez Corner Market, where he had been promoted from stock clerk to assistant manager over the past 3 years. The promotion came with additional responsibilities but barely enough extra income to cover Grace's school supplies and transportation costs. However, the job had taught him skills that would prove invaluable in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Managing the market meant interacting with customers from every economic level and cultural background in Meridian Heights. Daniel had learned to communicate effectively with everyone from day laborers paying in exact change to wealthy residents buying gourmet items for dinner parties. He had developed an instinctive ability to read people's needs, respond to their concerns with patience and respect, and handle difficult situations with diplomatic skill. "Mr. Ashford," said Mrs. Patterson, an elderly customer who had become a regular over the years, "I wanted to thank you for helping my grandson with his college application essay last week. The admissions counselor said it was one of the most compelling personal statements they'd ever read." Daniel had spent his lunch break helping the young man articulate his experiences growing up in their neighborhood, drawing connections between local community challenges and broader social issues. It wasn't the first time he had found himself mentoring young people whose circumstances reminded him of his own struggles. Despite lacking formal higher education, Daniel possessed a natural wisdom and emotional intelligence that allowed him to guide others through complex decisions. The afternoon shift brought a different rhythm, as Daniel handled the market's accounting, inventory management, and vendor relationships. These responsibilities had forced him to develop financial literacy, negotiation skills, and organizational abilities that rivaled those of business school graduates. He understood profit margins, supply chain logistics, and customer relationship management because his family's stability depended on the market's success. Grace arrived after school, as she did every day, transforming the market's back office into her study space. The sight of a Whitmore Academy student doing homework among inventory sheets and supply catalogs might have seemed incongruous, but it perfectly captured the dual worlds they navigated daily. "How was your presentation on Renaissance art today?" Daniel asked, noting the satisfaction in his daughter's expression. "Professor Martinez said my analysis of Botticelli's use of classical mythology was graduate-level work," Grace replied, pulling out her tablet to show him images she had used in her presentation. "But honestly, Papa, I think I learned more about artistic interpretation from watching you arrange the store displays. You have an eye for composition that most people never develop." The observation wasn't casual flattery. Daniel approached every aspect of his work with the same attention to detail and aesthetic consideration that Evelyn had brought to her academic research. Store displays became exercises in visual storytelling. Customer interactions became opportunities to practice the kind of gracious hospitality that his late wife had modeled. Even mundane tasks were performed with a level of care that reflected deep, personal values rather than mere job requirements. Evening brought their most treasured routine, dinner preparation that doubled as cultural education. Tonight, Daniel was teaching Grace to prepare coq au vin, a recipe he had learned from Evelyn during their early marriage. The dish required techniques that most people associated with formal culinary training, but Daniel had mastered them through years of careful practice and attention to detail. "The key is patience," Daniel explained as Grace practiced the proper technique for flambeing the brandy. "Good food, like most worthwhile things, can't be rushed. Each step builds on the previous one, and shortcuts usually lead to disappointment." As they cooked together, Grace shared stories from her day at Whitmore Academy, the casual mentions of family vacations to European capitals, discussions of stock portfolios and trust funds, the unconscious assumptions that everyone's life included private tutors and summer homes. She navigated these conversations with remarkable poise, neither pretending to share experiences she hadn't had, nor allowing herself to feel diminished by what she lacked. "Vivian Sterling mentioned that her family is hosting the pre-gala reception at their estate tomorrow," Grace said carefully. "She seemed surprised when I said you would be attending the main event. I think she assumes that scholarship parents don't usually participate in the social aspects of school life." Daniel recognized the diplomatic way his daughter was preparing him for potential social challenges without making him feel inadequate. Grace had inherited Evelyn's gift for navigating delicate social situations, but she had also developed her own strength through years of bridging the gap between their family's reality and the privileged world of her education. After dinner, their routine included what they called cultural enrichment time, an hour spent reading together, discussing current events, or exploring topics that interested them both. Tonight, Grace was reading aloud from Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had made Evelyn such a compelling lecturer. The discussion that followed revealed the depth of understanding that both father and daughter brought to complex social and historical issues. Daniel's perspectives, shaped by years of economic struggle and community involvement, complemented Grace's academic knowledge in ways that created insights neither could have achieved alone. "Papa," Grace said as they prepared for bed, "I know tomorrow night will be challenging, but I want you to know that I'm proud to have you as my father. The other parents might have more money or fancier degrees, but none of them have your heart or your wisdom. Mama always said that true nobility comes from how we treat others, especially when no one is watching." Daniel tucked his daughter into bed in the same small room where Evelyn had read her bedtime stories years earlier. The apartment might lack the spacious elegance of their classmates' homes, but it was filled with love, learning, and the kind of authentic connection that money couldn't buy. As he prepared for his own rest, Daniel reflected on the evening ahead. He knew that people like Vivian Sterling would judge him by standards he had never been taught to meet, but he also knew that Evelyn had prepared him for this moment in ways that extended far beyond formal etiquette or social protocols. The grace under pressure that Daniel had developed through years of single parenthood, the emotional intelligence he had cultivated through customer service and community involvement, and the authentic dignity he had learned from his late wife, would soon prove more valuable than any inherited privilege or elite education. Tomorrow night, Vivian Sterling's cruel bet would backfire in ways she could never anticipate, because she had fundamentally misunderstood what true class actually looked like when it walked through the doors of high society. The phone call that would change everything came at 7:23 a.m. on the morning of the gala, shattering the careful routine that Daniel and Grace had established over 3 years of navigating their precarious circumstances. Grace was in the shower, humming softly as she prepared for what should have been an ordinary Friday at Whitmore Academy, when Daniel's phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Ashford, this is Dr. Rebecca Foster, Grace's guidance counselor at Whitmore Academy. I'm calling because there's been a significant development regarding Grace's academic standing that requires immediate attention." Daniel's stomach dropped as he set down his coffee mug, the words, "academic standing," triggering every fear he had harbored about their ability to maintain Grace's place in the prestigious institution. Had they discovered some financial irregularity? Was there a problem with her scholarship status? Had his own background somehow compromised his daughter's position? "What kind of development, Dr. Foster?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. "Grace has been selected as a finalist for the Morrison International Scholarship, a full ride to Oxford University that includes living expenses, research funding, and graduate school guarantees. It's the most prestigious academic honor available to American high school students, and Grace is one of only 3 finalists nationwide." Daniel felt his knees weaken with relief, but Dr. Foster's tone suggested there was more to the story. "However," she continued, "the final selection process requires a comprehensive family interview with the Morrison Foundation Board, which includes detailed discussions about Grace's home environment, family values, and the support system that shaped her academic excellence. The interview is scheduled for Monday morning, but there's an informal meet-and-greet happening tonight at the gala." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. The Morrison Foundation Board would be evaluating not just Grace's academic achievements, but the family that had produced such remarkable results. They would be assessing Daniel's worthiness as a parent, his ability to represent the kind of values the foundation wanted to promote, and his capacity to support Grace through the challenges of international education. "Dr. Foster, I need to be completely honest with you," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I'm prepared for that kind of scrutiny. Grace deserves this opportunity more than anything in the world, but I'm terrified that my background might somehow compromise her chances." "Mr. Ashford, the foundation specifically looks for students who have achieved excellence despite obstacles, not because of advantages. Grace's academic record is extraordinary, precisely because she has overcome challenges that would have defeated students with far more resources. The question isn't whether you're good enough for them, it's whether they're worthy of your daughter." After ending the call, Daniel sat in his small kitchen, staring at the formal invitation to the gala that had seemed like such a minor obligation just minutes before. Now it represented the most crucial evening of Grace's life, and potentially the moment when his own inadequacies could destroy her dreams. Grace emerged from the bathroom, her hair still damp, humming the same melody that Evelyn used to sing while preparing for university faculty events. The sight of her father's pale complexion and worried expression immediately shifted her attention from her own morning routine to his obvious distress. "Papa, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel explained the phone call, watching as Grace's expression moved through surprise, excitement, and then concern as she processed the implications of the evening ahead. At 15, she possessed an emotional intelligence that often surpassed that of adults twice her age, and she immediately understood the pressure her father was feeling. "Papa, this is incredible news, but I can see you're scared. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that everything we've worked for, everything your mother dreamed for you, everything you've earned through your own brilliance, could be jeopardized because I don't know which fork to use for the salad course or how to discuss quarterly earnings with technology executives." Grace sat beside her father at their small kitchen table, taking his hands in hers with the same gentle gesture Evelyn had used during their most difficult moments after her diagnosis. "Papa, do you remember what Mama used to say about the difference between being educated and being intelligent?" Daniel nodded, recalling one of Evelyn's favorite topics during their late-night conversations about academic politics and social hierarchies. She said that education is about knowing facts, but intelligence is about understanding people and situations. She said you had more natural intelligence than most of her colleagues with multiple degrees, because you could read people's hearts and respond to what they actually needed. The reminder of Evelyn's faith in him provided some comfort, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's stakes were higher than anything he had previously faced. This wasn't just about his own pride or comfort. It was about Grace's entire future. What if I embarrass you? What if I say something wrong, or use improper etiquette, or reveal that I don't understand references that everyone else takes for granted? What if the foundation decides that Grace's family background isn't sophisticated enough for their program? Grace stood up and walked to the small shelf where they kept Evelyn's books and academic awards. She returned with a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her mother, opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "Mama wrote this the night before her first faculty reception, when she was terrified about fitting in with the other professors' wives. Listen to this. True sophistication has nothing to do with knowing the right wines or wearing the right clothes. It comes from approaching every person with genuine interest and respect, from listening more than talking, and from remembering that everyone has something valuable to teach us if we're humble enough to learn." Daniel read the passage twice, feeling Evelyn's presence in the familiar handwriting and recognizing the wisdom that had guided their marriage through 14 years of joy and struggle. "Grace, I'm not worried about embarrassing myself. I'm worried about limiting your opportunities, because I don't come from the world they expect." "Papa, the Morrison Foundation doesn't want students from perfect families with unlimited resources. They want students who have learned resilience, creativity, and determination through real challenges. They want to invest in people who will use their education to make the world better, not just to maintain their existing privileges." As Grace prepared to leave for school, she paused at the door with the same thoughtful expression she wore when solving particularly complex problems. "Papa, tonight isn't about proving you belong in their world. It's about showing them that their world needs more people like you, people who understand what really matters, and who raise children who can achieve excellence without losing their humanity." The day that followed was the longest in Daniel's memory. Every customer interaction at Rodriguez Corner Market became a rehearsal for evening conversations he couldn't predict. Every mundane task felt weighted with significance, as if the way he arranged, produced displays, or handled difficult vendors would somehow determine Grace's academic future. His supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed his distraction and pulled him aside during the afternoon shift. "Daniel, you've been wound tighter than a watch spring all day. What's going on?" When Daniel explained the situation, Mrs. Rodriguez's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "Me, Joe, I've been watching you work for 3 years. You handle every crisis with grace, treat every customer with respect, and solve problems that would defeat people with fancy business degrees. Tonight, just be yourself. That's more than enough." The validation from someone whose opinion he respected provided temporary comfort, but as closing time approached, Daniel felt the weight of the evening settling over him like a heavy coat. He had borrowed a tuxedo that fit better than the previous one, researched the foundation board members online, and practiced conversations in front of the bathroom mirror, but none of that preparation addressed his deepest fear. What if being himself wasn't enough? What if the qualities that made him a good father and a reliable employee weren't sufficient for the rarefied world Grace deserved to enter? What if his love for his daughter, despite being unconditional and profound, couldn't compensate for the social advantages he had never been able to provide? As Daniel locked up the market and prepared to return home for the most important evening of their lives, he carried with him both the terror of potential failure and the desperate hope that somehow the values Evelyn had instilled in both of them would prove stronger than the prejudices they were about to face. The gala was no longer just a social obligation or even a scholarship evaluation. It had become a test of everything Daniel believed about worth, dignity, and the power of authentic character to transcend artificial barriers. Grace's future hung in the balance, and Daniel knew that the next few hours would determine whether their family's greatest dreams would become reality or remain forever out of reach. The valet stand at Grandview Estate stretched like a gleaming parade of automotive excellence, each vehicle worth more than Daniel's annual salary. Bentleys, Ferraris, and Maseratis sat in perfectly aligned rows, their polished surfaces reflecting the estate's elaborate lighting system. Daniel and Grace emerged from their modest taxi, and the contrast couldn't have been more stark. Her Whitmore Academy blazer looked appropriately elegant, while his borrowed tuxedo, despite his best efforts, carried the subtle markers of rental rather than ownership. Grace squeezed her father's arm gently as they approached the imposing marble steps leading to the estate's main entrance. "Remember what Mama used to say about first impressions, Papa? People see what they expect to see, until you give them reason to look deeper." The estate itself was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation, rising 3 stories above manicured gardens that probably required a larger maintenance budget than most people's salaries. Massive columns supported a portico, where guests gathered in clusters, their laughter carrying the easy confidence of people who had never questioned their right to occupy such spaces. Crystal light spilled from enormous windows, illuminating conversations conducted in multiple languages and accents that spoke of international education and global business interests. Daniel paused at the entrance, watching the social choreography unfolding before them. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos moved with the fluid grace of people born to formal wear, while women in designer gowns navigated conversations with the skill of trained diplomats. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, what to say, and how to position themselves within the complex social hierarchies that governed such gatherings. "Mr. Ashford and Miss Grace." The voice belonged to Dr. Rebecca Foster, who approached them with the warm professionalism that had made her such an effective advocate for scholarship students. "I'm so delighted you could join us this evening. Grace, you look absolutely radiant, and Mr. Ashford, that tuxedo suits you perfectly." The gracious welcome provided a momentary buffer against Daniel's growing anxiety, but as they moved deeper into the reception area, the cultural differences became increasingly apparent. Conversations swirled around topics that assumed shared experiences Daniel had never had. Summers in the Hamptons, ski trips to Switzerland, art acquisitions, and investment strategies that treated millions of dollars as casual conversation pieces. "The Degas we acquired last month has already appreciated 15%, one woman was saying to her companion. "Our art consultant predicted it would be a solid addition to the collection, but even she was surprised by the immediate market response." "We're considering a piece by Banksy for the guest house," replied another guest. "Something contemporary to balance the classical pieces in the main residence." Of course, authentication is always challenging with his work, but our dealer has excellent connections in London. Daniel found himself genuinely fascinated by the discussion, despite feeling completely out of place. His years with Evelyn had given him an appreciation for art and culture that went beyond mere social signaling, but he lacked the financial context that allowed these conversations to flow so naturally. He understood the aesthetic and historical significance of the artists being discussed, but had never considered art as an investment vehicle or status symbol. Grace moved through these conversations with remarkable poise, responding to questions about her academic interests with the same thoughtful intelligence she brought to everything. When asked about her plans for higher education, She mentioned the Morrison Scholarship possibility with appropriate excitement while carefully avoiding details that might reveal their financial circumstances. Oxford University has such a distinguished program in international relations, commented Helena Sterling, Vivian's mother and CEO of Sterling Technologies. Grace, your academic record suggests you would thrive in that environment. I assume your family has extensive European connections that influenced your interest in international studies? The question carried subtle implications that Daniel recognized immediately. Helena Sterling was probing for the kind of international experience and cultural sophistication that wealthy families took for granted. Summer abroad programs, family trips to European capitals, and the casual familiarity with global cultures that came from unlimited travel budgets. Grace responded with characteristic grace, neither claiming experiences she hadn't had nor apologizing for their absence. My interest in international relations comes from observing how local communities like ours connect to global economic patterns. I've learned so much from the diverse customers at my father's workplace and from studying how international events affect our neighborhood businesses. The answer was both honest and sophisticated, demonstrating Grace's ability to find intellectual depth in circumstances that others might dismiss as mundane. Daniel felt a surge of pride at his daughter's diplomatic skill, but he also noticed the subtle shift in Helena Sterling's expression, a momentary reassessment that suggested she was reconsidering her initial assumptions about the Ashford family. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself navigating increasingly complex social situations. A conversation about wine selections required him to admit his limited knowledge while expressing genuine interest in learning. A discussion of recent theater productions on Broadway challenged him to contribute meaningfully despite having never attended a professional theater performance. Each interaction felt like a test where the stakes were Grace's future rather than his own comfort. "Mr. Ashford," said a distinguished gentleman Daniel recognized as Judge William Thornfield, one of the Morrison Foundation board members. "Grace mentioned that you work in retail management that must provide interesting insights into consumer behavior and economic trends." The question could have been dismissive, but Judge Thornfield's tone suggested genuine curiosity. Daniel recognized an opportunity to demonstrate that his work experience, while lacking prestige, had provided valuable knowledge about how economic policies affected real families and communities. "Working at Rodriguez Corner Market has taught me how global supply chain disruptions affect local food prices and how economic uncertainty changes family spending patterns," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "I've watched customers adjust their purchasing decisions based on everything from fuel costs to seasonal employment changes. It's given me a ground-level perspective on economic theory that I think complements what Grace learns in her macroeconomics classes." Judge Thornfield's eyebrows rose slightly, and Daniel could see genuine interest replacing polite courtesy. "That's a fascinating perspective. I imagine you've observed how monetary policy changes affect real families in ways that academic economists might miss." The conversation that followed revealed Daniel's natural intelligence and observational skills in ways that formal education credentials couldn't capture. His years of customer service had taught him to read social dynamics, anticipate needs, and respond to complex situations with patience and wisdom. These qualities, while developed in a humble context, translated surprisingly well to the sophisticated social environment of the gala. However, not everyone was prepared to look beyond surface impressions. Vivian Sterling had been watching the Ashfords throughout the evening, waiting for the moment when Daniel's supposed inadequacies would become apparent to the other guests. She had orchestrated what she believed would be the perfect exposure of his unsuitability for their social circle. "Mr. Ashford," Vivian interrupted the conversation with Judge Thornfield, her voice carrying the casual cruelty that had become her trademark. "I was just telling my friends about your fascinating background. They're so curious to hear about your experiences with, what was it, maintaining commercial properties? It must be so different from the consulting work most of our parents do." The comment was designed to highlight Daniel's working-class background and create an uncomfortable moment that would expose his inability to fit into their privileged world. Vivian's friends gathered around with the anticipation of spectators at a social execution, expecting to witness the confirmation of their assumptions about class differences and social hierarchies. Daniel felt every eye in the immediate vicinity turned toward him, and he recognized this as the moment Evelyn had prepared him for during countless conversations about dignity under pressure. His response would determine not only how these people saw him, but whether Grace's scholarship dreams would survive the evening. The weight of his daughter's future rested on his ability to respond with grace to a challenge designed to humiliate him, and Daniel knew that everything he had learned about authentic character was about to be tested by people who confused wealth with worth. The silence that followed Vivian Sterling's calculated insult stretched across the marble foyer like a held breath. Daniel could feel the weight of expectation from the gathered guests, some hoping for entertainment at his expense, others genuinely curious about how he would handle such obvious baiting. Grace stood beside him, her posture straight and dignified, but Daniel caught the slight tension in her shoulders that revealed her concern for what was about to unfold. Daniel looked directly at Vivian, recognizing in her expression the same casual cruelty he had encountered from privileged customers who assumed his service position made him intellectually inferior. He had learned long ago that such moments required neither defensiveness nor aggression, but something far more challenging, the kind of gracious response that revealed the speaker's character rather than his own. "Vivian," Daniel said with a gentle smile that carried no trace of resentment, "you're absolutely right that my work experience has been different from most parents here. I've spent years learning from people who solve problems with their hands, manage family budgets down to the last dollar, and build community connections that sustain neighborhoods through difficult times. It's given me tremendous respect for the kind of practical wisdom that doesn't always appear in business schools but proves invaluable in real-world situations." The response caught Vivian off guard, as it neither provided the defensive reaction she had anticipated, nor acknowledged her attempt at humiliation. Instead, Daniel had reframed his background as a source of valuable knowledge rather than social disadvantage, and done so with such genuine warmth that her cruelty became more apparent to observers than any inadequacy on his part. Judge Thornfield stepped forward, his expression revealing genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. "Mr. Ashford, that's an intriguing perspective. In my years on various foundation boards, I've observed that some of our most successful scholarship recipients come from backgrounds that provided real-world education alongside academic achievement. It creates a combination of practical wisdom and intellectual capability that purely privileged backgrounds sometimes lack." Helena Sterling moved closer to the conversation, her CEO instincts recognizing that she might be witnessing something more significant than a typical social interaction. "Mr. Ashford, I'm curious about your perspective on workforce development. Sterling Technologies has been struggling to bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application in our entry-level hiring. How do you think educational institutions could better prepare students for real workplace challenges?" The question was clearly a test, but not the kind Vivian had intended. Helena Sterling was genuinely exploring whether Daniel possessed insights that could benefit her billion-dollar technology company, and the query required him to demonstrate strategic thinking rather than mere social graces. Daniel considered the question carefully, drawing on his years of observing how different people approached problem-solving under pressure. "Mrs. Sterling, I think the challenge is that traditional education often teaches students what to think rather than how to think adaptively. In my experience managing diverse teams and serving customers from various backgrounds, the most valuable skill is the ability to listen carefully, identify underlying needs rather than surface requests, and develop creative solutions using available resources." He paused, watching as several guests leaned in with genuine interest. "For example, we had a supply chain disruption last year that threatened to leave us without essential products during a neighborhood emergency. Instead of simply accepting the shortage, our team collaborated with other local businesses to create a temporary distribution network that served the entire community. It required skills that couldn't be taught in a classroom, relationship building, creative problem solving, and the ability to see connections that weren't immediately obvious." Dr. Rebecca Foster, who had been observing the exchange with growing satisfaction, joined the conversation. "That's exactly the kind of systems thinking we try to develop in our students at Whitmore Academy. Grace has demonstrated similar abilities in her project work, finding innovative approaches to complex problems by combining theoretical knowledge with practical observation." The conversation was evolving into something Vivian had never anticipated. Instead of exposing Daniel's inadequacies, her attempted humiliation had created an opportunity for him to demonstrate qualities that impressed the very people whose opinions mattered most for Grace's future. The Morrison Foundation board members were seeing exactly the kind of authentic leadership and creative intelligence they valued in scholarship recipients and their families. Vivian's friend Clarissa, emboldened by what she perceived as her leader's initial success, decided to escalate the challenge. "Mr. Ashford, it's fascinating to hear about your community involvement. But surely you must find tonight's environment somewhat overwhelming? I mean, the cultural references, the social expectations, the level of sophistication required for these gatherings. It must be quite different from your usual social circle. The comment was designed to highlight Daniel's fish-out-of-water status and force him to admit his discomfort with their world. Clarissa assumed that acknowledging the cultural gap would expose his fundamental unsuitability for the academic and social opportunities Grace was pursuing. Daniel's response revealed the depth of wisdom Evelyn had instilled in him during their years together. Clarissa, you raise an important point about cultural differences. I do find this environment different from my daily experience, but I have discovered that genuine curiosity and respect for others transcends most social barriers. Tonight, I've learned about art acquisition strategies that I'd never considered, heard perspectives on international economics that challenge my assumptions, and engaged in conversations that will influence how I think about community development for years to come. He gestured toward the elegant gathering around them. What strikes me most is how many of the challenges you discuss, building sustainable organizations, developing effective leadership, creating positive community impact, are fundamentally the same issues we face in every neighborhood and business environment. The scale and resources differ, but the underlying human dynamics are remarkably consistent. Judge Thornfield nodded approvingly. That's a sophisticated observation, Mr. Ashford. It suggests the kind of transferable intelligence that we look for in families who can support students through challenging academic transitions. The momentum of the conversation was shifting dramatically in Daniel's favor, but Vivian was not prepared to abandon her strategy. She had invested too much social capital in her bet to allow Daniel's unexpected sophistication to undermine her campaign. With the desperate calculation of someone whose worldview was being challenged, she decided to escalate to a more direct confrontation. Mr. Ashford, Vivian said, her voice carrying a sharper edge than before, you speak eloquently about community and leadership, but let's be practical. Grace is competing for opportunities that will place her among international leaders, diplomats, and industry innovators. Can you honestly say that your background has prepared you to guide her through the social and cultural expectations she'll face at Oxford University? Don't you think she might be better served by families who actually understand that world? The question cut to the heart of Daniel's deepest fears and represented the cruelest possible attack on his fitness as a parent. Vivian was no longer simply questioning his social credentials. She was challenging his right to support his daughter's dreams and suggesting that his love, despite being profound and sacrificial, was insufficient for Grace's needs. The gathering fell completely silent, recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that transcended typical social maneuvering. This was a fundamental challenge to the relationship between parent and child. The value of different types of knowledge, and the question of who deserved access to elite opportunities. Grace stepped forward, her young voice carrying the strength that 3 years of navigating between worlds had developed. Vivian, may I respond to that question? The request surprised everyone present, including Daniel, who had been preparing to defend both his parenting and his daughter's future. Grace's intervention suggested that she was ready to take control of a conversation that would determine her own destiny. The tension in the marble foyer was palpable, as Grace prepared to address not only Vivian's cruelty, but the fundamental assumptions about worth, preparation, and the relationship between privilege and capability that had been driving the entire evening's dynamics. Grace Ashford stood in the center of the marble foyer, her 15-year-old frame carrying herself with the poise of someone twice her age. The Whitmore Academy blazer she wore seemed to transform from a scholarship student's uniform into a symbol of earned excellence as she addressed the gathering of Meridian Heights' most influential residents. Vivian, you've asked whether my father's background has prepared him to guide me through the expectations I'll face at Oxford University, Grace began, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I'd like to share what his guidance has actually accomplished, because I think it speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding about what true preparation means. The assembled guests shifted their attention entirely to Grace, recognizing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Helena Sterling found herself genuinely curious about how this poised young woman would address such a personal and loaded question, while Judge Thornfield leaned forward with the expression of someone anticipating judicial wisdom from an unexpected source. 3 years ago, when my mother died, my father faced a choice that reveals everything about his character and capabilities. Grace continued. He could have accepted that our circumstances had changed, that my academic opportunities might be limited by our financial situation, and that I should adjust my dreams accordingly. Instead, he made a different decision. She gestured toward Daniel with obvious pride and affection. My father researched every scholarship program, every academic enrichment opportunity, and every resource that could help me maintain the educational path my mother had envisioned. But more importantly, he created a home environment where intellectual curiosity was valued above material possessions, where cultural education happened through library books and museum-free days rather than European vacations, and where I learned that true sophistication comes from understanding and respecting all kinds of people. Dr. Rebecca Foster watched with growing satisfaction as Grace articulated concepts that many adults struggled to express clearly. The young woman was demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual maturity and emotional intelligence that made her such an exceptional candidate for international academic opportunities. Vivian, you suggest that families who actually understand the world of Oxford University would better prepare me for success there, Grace said, her tone remaining respectful despite the obvious challenge in her words. But I think you misunderstand what that world actually values. Oxford doesn't want students who are comfortable with privilege. They want students who can think critically, solve complex problems, and contribute perspectives that emerge from real-world experience. She paused, allowing her words to settle among the listening guests before continuing with even greater conviction. My father taught me that every person we encounter has something valuable to teach us, regardless of their economic status or social position. When I struggle with a difficult concept in advanced mathematics, he helps me work through it using practical examples from inventory management and customer service. When I'm writing essays about social justice, he provides insights based on years of observing how economic policies actually affect working families. When I need to understand leadership, I watch him manage conflicts between employees with patience and wisdom that most CEOs would envy. Helena Sterling found herself reconsidering every assumption she had made about the Ashford family. As a technology executive who had built her career on recognizing talent regardless of its packaging, she was beginning to see that Grace's academic excellence wasn't achieved despite her background, but because of the unique advantages her father's perspective had provided. Judge Thornfield stepped forward, his expression carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making judgments about character and capability. Grace, what you're describing sounds like a comprehensive education in leadership, critical thinking, and social awareness. Can you give us a specific example of how your father's guidance prepared you for academic challenges that more traditional backgrounds might not address? The question provided Grace with the opportunity she needed to demonstrate the practical value of her unconventional preparation. Last year, I was selected to participate in a Model United Nations conference, where I represented a developing nation in economic policy debates. Students from more privileged backgrounds approached the simulation with theoretical knowledge from their expensive prep courses, but they struggled to understand how abstract economic policies actually affect real families and communities. She looked around the gathering, ensuring she had everyone's attention before delivering her key point. My father's experience taught me to think about policy from the ground up. How changes in trade agreements affect local grocery stores. How unemployment statistics represent actual families facing difficult decisions. How international monetary policy impacts the customers who count their change carefully before making purchases. That perspective allowed me to contribute insights that surprised the college students and graduate school participants. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly, recognizing how Grace was connecting her family's experiences to academic excellence in ways that challenged conventional assumptions about educational advantage. Grace, that's exactly the kind of applied intelligence that distinguishes exceptional students from merely well-prepared ones. Daniel watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement, recognizing that she was demonstrating capabilities that even he hadn't fully appreciated. Grace was not only defending their family's worth, she was articulating a philosophy of education and preparation that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying Vivian's attacks. But there's something else I want to address, Grace continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. Vivian, you've suggested that my father lacks the cultural sophistication to guide me through international academic environments. I'd like you to consider what sophistication actually means. The young woman's confidence seemed to fill the marble space around them, transforming what had begun as a social confrontation into something approaching a masterclass in dignity and intelligence. True cultural sophistication isn't about knowing which wine pairs with specific courses or understanding the social significance of designer labels. It's about approaching every culture and situation with respect, curiosity, and humility. My father taught me that authentic confidence comes from treating everyone with kindness, regardless of their status, and that real intelligence involves listening more than speaking. Helena Sterling exchanged a meaningful glance with Judge Thornfield, both recognizing that they were witnessing exactly the kind of character and wisdom that their institution sought to cultivate and support. When I arrive at Oxford University, I won't need to pretend to be someone I'm not or apologize for my background, Grace said with quiet conviction. I'll arrive with the confidence that comes from knowing I've earned my place through merit, the humility that comes from understanding how many people contributed to my success, and the perspective that comes from seeing excellence in unexpected places. She turned to face Vivian directly, her expression compassionate rather than confrontational. Vivian, I think the question isn't whether my father's background prepared me for success at Oxford. The question is whether privileged backgrounds like yours prepare students to contribute meaningfully to a world that needs leaders who understand real challenges and can connect with people from all walks of life. The observation landed with devastating precision, not because it was cruel, but because it was undeniably true. Grace had managed to expose the limitations of Vivian's worldview, while maintaining her own dignity and demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual sophistication that elite institutions valued most. Judge Thornfield began to applaud slowly, his approval soon joined by Dr. Foster and several other guests who recognized that they had witnessed something remarkable. Helena Sterling found herself genuinely impressed, not just by Grace's eloquence, but by the family dynamic that had produced such extraordinary maturity and wisdom. Vivian Sterling stood frozen, realizing that her carefully planned humiliation had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing the Ashfords' inadequacy, the evening had revealed her own narrow understanding of worth and preparation. Grace had demonstrated that true nobility had nothing to do with inherited privilege, and everything to do with character, intelligence, and the ability to find wisdom in unexpected places. Daniel felt tears gathering in his eyes as he watched his daughter command the respect of some of the most influential people in Meridian Heights, not through social manipulation or inherited advantage, but through the authentic excellence that he and Evelyn had nurtured together. Their family's greatest test had become their most triumphant validation. The transformation in the evening's atmosphere was immediate and profound. What had begun as Vivian Sterling's carefully orchestrated social ambush had evolved into something entirely different, a genuine celebration of the Ashford family's remarkable character and Grace's exceptional capabilities. The applause that followed Grace's speech rippled through the marble foyer and into the main ballroom, drawing curious guests from other conversations to discover what had inspired such enthusiastic approval. Helena Sterling approached Daniel with the measured pace of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions in revenue. Her expression carried none of the polite tolerance she had shown earlier, replaced instead by the focused attention she reserved for genuinely intriguing business propositions. Mr. Ashford, I find myself reconsidering several assumptions I brought to this conversation, she said, extending her hand with genuine respect. Your daughter's perspective on leadership and social awareness suggests a family dynamic that produces exactly the kind of innovative thinking my company struggles to cultivate in our executive development programs. The admission represented a significant shift in the evening's power dynamics. Helena Sterling was publicly acknowledging that the Ashford family possessed qualities that her billion-dollar technology empire actively sought but rarely found, even among candidates with the most prestigious educational backgrounds. Dr. Margaret Holloway, another Morrison Foundation board member whom Daniel hadn't yet met, joined the expanding circle of conversation. Her silver hair and elegant bearing spoke of decades spent in academic administration, but her eyes carried the sharp intelligence of someone who had dedicated her career to identifying exceptional potential regardless of its packaging. Grace, your analysis of cultural sophistication reminds me of a conversation I had with the Dean of Oxford's International Relations program just last month, Dr. Holloway said. He mentioned that their most successful students often come from backgrounds that provide real-world perspective rather than purely academic preparation. Your family seems to exemplify exactly what they're seeking. The validation from multiple Morrison Foundation board members created a momentum that drew additional guests into their orbit. Professor James Whitmore III, whose great-grandfather had founded the Academy, approached with the curiosity of someone whose family legacy had taught him to recognize authentic excellence when he encountered it. Mr. Ashford, I've been observing your interactions this evening with considerable interest, Professor Whitmore said. Your approach to conversation, listening carefully, asking thoughtful questions, and contributing insights rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak, demonstrates the kind of intellectual humility that we try to instill in our students but rarely see modeled so naturally. Daniel found himself at the center of a growing group of influential educators, business leaders, and philanthropists who were discovering that their preconceptions about social class and intellectual capability had been fundamentally challenged by the evening's events. Each new conversation revealed additional dimensions of the wisdom and perspective that his unique background had provided. Judge Thornfield pulled out his phone and began typing notes with the efficiency of someone accustomed to documenting important insights. Mr. Ashford, would you be willing to speak at our next Morrison Foundation retreat? We're always looking for presentations that challenge our board members to think differently about talent identification and development support. The invitation represented an extraordinary validation. Daniel was being asked to educate the very people whose approval he had feared he would never earn. More importantly, the request suggested that his perspective was viewed not as a curiosity to be tolerated, but as expertise to be shared and valued. Grace watched the expanding circle of admirers with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that her defense of their family had accomplished something beyond mere social acceptance. She had created an opportunity for her father's natural gifts to shine in an environment that typically overlooked people from his background, and the results were exceeding even her optimistic expectations. "Papa," she whispered during a brief lull in the conversations, "I think Mama would be proud of how this evening is developing." Dr. Rebecca Foster approached with a tablet displaying what appeared to be official documents. "Grace, I have some news that I think you'll find exciting. The Morrison Foundation Board has been discussing your application throughout the evening, and they've asked me to inform you that you've been selected as this year's Morrison International Scholar." The announcement drew gasps of appreciation from the gathered guests, who understood the significance of the scholarship and the rigorous selection process it required. Grace's academic achievement was now officially validated at the highest level, but more importantly, the selection represented recognition that her family's approach to education and character development had produced exactly the kind of student the foundation sought to support. Engine. The whispered campaign gathered momentum as Vivian leveraged relationships her family had cultivated over decades of social prominence. She targeted parents whose own children had been passed over for prestigious opportunities, appealing to their resentment and fear that merit-based selection might diminish their inherited advantages. "It's all very inspiring," commented Bradford Ashworth III, whose son had been rejected by the Morrison Foundation the previous year despite his family's generous donations. "But we have to ask ourselves whether this kind of populist approach maintains the standards that make these institutions meaningful. If anyone from any background can suddenly be considered equally qualified, what value does our investment in proper preparation actually have?" The counter-narrative Vivian was constructing appealed to the deepest anxieties of Meridian Heights, elite families. For generations, they had operated under the assumption that their wealth and social position provided legitimate advantages for their children. The Ashfords' success threatened not just individual competition, but the entire system that justified their privileged status. Charlotte Kingsley, whose family had attended Whitmore Academy for 4 generations, found herself nodding along with Bradford's concerns. "My grandmother always said that certain institutions were meant to preserve standards, not accommodate every sob story that comes along. We're being manipulated by emotional appeals instead of maintaining objective criteria." The criticism reached Helena Sterling during the fish course, delivered by her own sister Margaret, who had watched Vivian's humiliation with growing concern for the family's social standing. "Helena, I understand your corporate instincts about talent identification," Margaret said carefully, "but you need to consider the broader implications. If Whitmore Academy and the Morrison Foundation start prioritizing diverse backgrounds over proven excellence, it threatens the very exclusivity that makes these institutions valuable. Our family has invested decades building relationships within this community." The pressure on Helena Sterling intensified as longtime business associates began questioning her judgment. Richard Cromwell, whose investment firm handled Sterling Technologies' pension fund, approached with the subtle leverage that characterized high-stakes social politics. "Helena, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the Ashford family," he said with the measured tone of someone delivering financial advice. While individual success stories are always heartwarming, we should consider whether encouraging this kind of accessibility aligns with Sterling Technologies' brand positioning. Your shareholders and board members might question whether supporting populist initiatives reflects appropriate corporate priorities. The challenge was carefully crafted to exploit Helena's dual responsibilities as both a CEO answerable to shareholders and a community leader whose reputation affected business relationships. Cromwell was suggesting that her support for the Ashfords could be portrayed as poor business judgment that prioritized social sentiment over corporate interests. Professor Whitmore faced similar pressure from his academy's most influential donor families. Dr. Reginald Fairfax, whose family foundation provided significant annual funding, requested a private conversation during the meet course. "James, I appreciate your enthusiasm for diversity initiatives," Dr. Fairfax said, "but the board needs to consider our fiduciary responsibilities to families who have supported Whitmore Academy for generations. We can't allow sentiment to override the careful selection processes that maintain our academic reputation. Parents pay premium tuition with the expectation that their children will be educated alongside appropriate peers." The coded language barely concealed the fundamental challenge to inclusive policies. Dr. Fairfax was arguing that supporting students like Grace and families like the Ashfords would diminish the value proposition for wealthy families who viewed exclusive education as a purchased commodity rather than an earned opportunity. Judge Thornfield discovered that his support for the Morrison Foundation's decision was generating controversy within philanthropic circles that could affect future fundraising efforts. Mrs. Victoria Harrington, whose late husband's estate provided substantial foundation funding, expressed her concerns with the diplomatic precision of someone accustomed to wielding financial influence. "William, the Morrison Foundation has always represented the highest standards of academic excellence," she said, "but tonight's selection seems driven more by political correctness than objective merit. My husband established our funding with the expectation that scholarships would support genuinely exceptional students, not serve social engineering purposes." The criticism struck at the heart of Judge Thornfield's vulnerability as a foundation leader who depended on donor support to maintain programs. Mrs. Harrington was suggesting that continued funding might depend on returning to selection criteria that favored traditional elite backgrounds over demonstrated achievement from diverse circumstances. Meanwhile, Grace found herself facing a different kind of pressure as Vivian's closest friends launched subtle attacks designed to undermine her confidence and social standing among Whitmore Academy students. Clarissa approached during the dessert course with the practiced cruelty that characterized their social circle. "Grace, congratulations on your scholarship," she said with false sweetness. "Though I have to say, some students are wondering whether the foundation lowered their standards this year. I mean, everyone knows you're smart, but the Morrison Scholarship used to go to students with broader qualifications than just good grades." The implication was carefully designed to plant doubt about Grace's worthiness while appearing to offer congratulations. Clarissa was suggesting that Grace's selection represented diminished standards rather than exceptional achievement, and that her peers would view the scholarship as charity rather than earned recognition. The coordinated campaign against the Ashfords revealed the sophisticated machinery that protected elite privilege when it felt threatened. Financial pressure on institutional leaders, social ostracism for supporters, and psychological warfare against the targets themselves, all deployed with the subtle precision that characterized high society politics. Daniel observed the shifting dynamics with the same analytical skills that had made him successful in customer service and conflict resolution. He recognized the signs of organized resistance and understood that the evening's triumph had created powerful enemies who viewed his family's success as a threat to their established advantages. "Grace," he said quietly during a lull in the formal program, "I think we need to prepare for the possibility that tonight's success might create challenges we haven't anticipated. Some people feel threatened by what we represent, and they have resources to make things difficult." Grace nodded, her 15-year-old wisdom already recognizing the political dimensions of their situation. "Papa, Mama always said that when you challenge unjust systems, the systems fight back. Are you prepared for that kind of battle?" The question hung between them as they watched Vivian Sterling work the room with renewed determination. Her initial humiliation transformed into a crusade to restore the social order that the Ashfords' success had disrupted. The evening was far from over, and the most dangerous challenges were still to come. Helena Sterling faced a moment of decision that would define not only her personal integrity, but her company's values and her family's legacy. The pressure to abandon her support for the Ashfords was mounting from multiple directions, each argument carefully crafted to exploit her vulnerabilities as a CEO, community member, and mother. The battle for the soul of Meridian Heights elite institutions was just beginning, and the stakes extended far beyond one family's social acceptance to encompass fundamental questions about merit, opportunity, and the future of American leadership. The crystal chandeliers of Grandview Estate cast dancing shadows across the main ballroom as the evening's formal program approached its climax. Daniel Ashford stood at the periphery of the elegant gathering, observing the subtle power dynamics that Vivian Sterling's counter-campaign had set in motion. He recognized the familiar patterns of workplace politics scaled up to institutional levels: the whispered conversations, the strategic positioning, and the careful cultivation of alliances designed to achieve specific outcomes. But Daniel also saw something that Vivian and her supporters had failed to anticipate. Their coordinated attack on his family's legitimacy was being observed by other parents and community members who had their own complicated relationships with Meridian Heights. Exclusive social hierarchies. The elite's desperate attempts to protect their advantages was exposing the very prejudices and insecurities that many people had suspected but never seen displayed so openly. Dr. Patricia Morales, a renowned pediatric surgeon whose daughter attended Whitmore Academy on a partial scholarship, approached Daniel with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a significant decision. "Mr. Ashford," she said, extending her hand with professional firmness, "I've been watching this evening's events with considerable interest. As someone who has navigated similar challenges in medical school and professional practice, I wanted you to know that there are many families here who understand exactly what you and Grace represent." Her statement carried weight beyond personal support. Dr. Morales was acknowledging that the Ashfords were not alone in their experience of being outsiders within elite institutions, and that their success could inspire other families who had felt isolated or marginalized by traditional social hierarchies. Professor David Chen, whose expertise in educational psychology had made him a respected voice in academic reform, joined the conversation with obvious enthusiasm. "Mr. Ashford, what we're witnessing tonight is precisely the kind of authentic leadership development that our educational institutions claim to promote but rarely achieve. Your family's approach to excellence challenges every assumption about privilege and preparation." The gathering momentum around the Ashfords began to attract additional supporters who had been quietly observing the evening's drama. These were not the inherited elite who dominated Meridian Heights' social hierarchy, but accomplished professionals, innovative entrepreneurs, and community leaders who had earned their positions through merit rather than inheritance. Helena Sterling found herself at a crossroads that would define not only her company's future direction, but her personal legacy. The financial and social pressure from traditional elite families was significant, but her CEO instincts recognized that supporting the Ashfords aligned with broader cultural shifts that could affect Sterling Technologies' long-term competitiveness. She approached the microphone that had been set up for the evening's final presentations, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that had made her one of the most successful technology executives in the country. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," Helena announced, her voice carrying the authority that came from leading a billion-dollar corporation through multiple market transformations. "Tonight's events have prompted me to reflect on what Sterling Technologies actually values in leadership development and community partnership." The ballroom fell silent as guests recognized that they were about to witness a defining moment that would influence institutional policies and social dynamics for years to come. "I've built my career on the principle that the best solutions often come from unexpected sources, and that diverse perspectives create stronger organizations than homogeneous thinking," Helena continued. "The Ashford family embodies exactly the kind of innovative leadership that our company and our community need to thrive in an increasingly complex world." She gestured toward Daniel and Grace with obvious respect. Mr. Ashford's insights about workforce development, combined with Grace's exceptional academic achievements, represent the kind of authentic excellence that Sterling Technologies will actively support through scholarship programs, internship opportunities, and community partnerships. The announcement represented more than corporate philanthropy. It was a public commitment that transformed the evening's social conflict into a broader statement about institutional values and leadership priorities. Judge Thornfield stepped forward to join Helena's declaration, his judicial authority lending weight to what was becoming a coalition of institutional leaders willing to challenge traditional hierarchies. The Morrison Foundation was established to identify and support exceptional students regardless of their backgrounds, he said with the measured tone that characterized his most important legal decisions. Tonight's events have reminded us that our mission requires defending merit-based selection against pressure from those who prefer inherited advantage over earned achievement. The declarations from Helena Sterling and Judge Thornfield created a domino effect among other institutional leaders who had been quietly questioning the sustainability of exclusive practices that limited their access to the best talent available. Professor Whitmore approached the microphone with the deliberate pace of someone whose family legacy was intertwined with the institution he now led. His statement would carry particular significance because it represented a departure from generations of traditional academy policies. Whitmore Academy has always prided itself on educational excellence, he began, but tonight has clarified that true excellence requires embracing diverse definitions of preparation and qualification. The Ashford family demonstrates that character, intelligence, and determination transcend economic circumstances and social positioning. He paused to look directly at the families who had been pressuring him to maintain exclusive admission standards. Effective immediately, Whitmore Academy will expand our scholarship programs and develop new support systems to ensure that students like Grace can thrive academically while contributing their unique perspectives to our educational community. The transformation in institutional positions was happening with surprising speed, as leaders recognized that supporting the Ashfords aligned with broader trends toward merit-based selection and inclusive excellence that would determine their future relevance and effectiveness. Dr. Rebecca Foster took the microphone to make an announcement that surprised even the most progressive guests. Based on tonight's conversations and the exceptional leadership demonstrated by both Daniel and Grace Ashford, I'm pleased to announce that Whitmore Academy will be establishing the Ashford Family Fellowship, a program designed to support families navigating the transition between different social and economic environments. The fellowship represented more than recognition. It was institutionalizing the Ashfords' approach to bridging cultural divides and supporting authentic excellence regardless of background. Their personal success was being transformed into systematic change that could benefit hundreds of future families. Vivian Sterling watched in growing horror as her campaign to restore traditional hierarchies backfired catastrophically. Instead of isolating the Ashfords and discrediting their achievements, her attacks had prompted institutional leaders to make public commitments to exactly the kind of inclusive policies she had been trying to prevent. The evening's final surprise came when Grace Ashford requested permission to address the gathering one last time. Her request was granted with the eager anticipation of guests who had been consistently impressed by her maturity and insight throughout the evening. Thank you all for this incredible evening and for the opportunities you've created for my family. Grace began with the poise that had characterized all her interactions. But I want to address something that I think has been overlooked in tonight's discussions. The ballroom fell completely silent as the 15-year-old scholar prepared to deliver what many sensed would be the evening's definitive statement. Tonight isn't really about my family or even about scholarship programs and institutional policies, Grace continued with growing conviction. Tonight is about whether we're going to choose fear or curiosity, exclusion or excellence, inherited privilege or earned achievement. Her words carried the moral authority that had made her such an exceptional candidate for international academic opportunities, but now that authority was being directed toward fundamental questions about social justice and institutional responsibility. The choice we make tonight will determine not just who gets opportunities, but what kind of leaders we develop and what kind of community we become, Grace concluded. I hope we choose wisely. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, led by the very institutional leaders whose policies would implement the transformation Grace had articulated. The evening that had begun with Vivian Sterling's cruel bet had evolved into a mandate for systematic change that would reshape how Meridian Heights, elite institutions approached excellence, inclusion, and leadership development for generations to come. 6 months after the Grandview Estate Gala that would be remembered as the Night of Transformation in Meridian Heights social history, Daniel Ashford stood in his new office at the Sterling Technologies Community Development Center, reviewing applications for the expanded scholarship program that had grown far beyond anything imagined during that pivotal evening. The modest apartment above Rodriguez Corner Market now served as their weekend retreat, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment of unprecedented opportunity and responsibility. Grace's acceptance letter from Oxford University lay framed on Daniel's desk, but it was joined by dozens of similar letters from students whose paths had been opened by the institutional changes that their families' courage had inspired. The Ashford Family Fellowship had received over 3,000 applications in its first year, representing families from every economic background who sought the kind of authentic educational excellence that transcended traditional privilege barriers. The knock on his office door interrupted Daniel's morning review of fellowship applications. Dr. Rebecca Foster entered with the weekly update that had become their tradition, a comprehensive report on how the various programs and initiatives were affecting students, families, and institutional cultures throughout the region. "Daniel, I think you need to see these numbers," she said, spreading charts and statistics across his conference table. "The Ashford Fellowship recipients are outperforming traditional students at a rate that's attracting attention from educational researchers nationwide. More importantly, they're contributing perspectives and innovations that are transforming classroom discussions and research projects." The data told a remarkable story of how authentic diversity in educational environments created exponential improvements in learning outcomes, creative problem-solving, and leadership development. Students from backgrounds similar to the Ashfords weren't simply succeeding despite their circumstances. They were excelling because their experiences had provided unique analytical skills and emotional intelligence that complemented traditional academic preparation. "What's most interesting," Dr. Foster continued, "is how the presence of fellowship students has elevated the performance of their classmates from more privileged backgrounds. When you remove the assumption that wealth equals intelligence, everyone rises to higher standards." Daniel studied the reports with the same analytical attention he had once brought to inventory management and customer service challenges. The numbers represented more than statistical success. They validated the fundamental principle that had guided his parenting and community involvement for years. Excellence emerged when people were given genuine opportunities and authentic support, regardless of their starting circumstances. Helena Sterling's voice carried through the intercom, requesting permission to join their meeting. Over the past 6 months, she had become not just a supporter, but a genuine friend, whose respect for the Ashford family had deepened through regular collaboration on community development initiatives. "Daniel, Grace," she said as she entered the office, "I wanted to share some news that I think you'll find gratifying. The Harvard Business School has contacted Sterling Technologies about developing a case study on our community partnership model. They want to examine how authentic diversity initiatives can create competitive advantages for corporations while generating meaningful social impact." The academic recognition represented validation from the highest levels of business education, but Daniel found himself more interested in the practical applications than the theoretical acclaim. "Helena, what does this mean for the families who are just beginning their journeys through these programs?" "It means that major corporations across the country are interested in replicating our approach," she replied with obvious satisfaction. "We're receiving calls from technology companies, financial institutions, and manufacturing organizations who want to understand how we identify and develop talent from non-traditional backgrounds." The expansion of their model beyond Meridian Heights had exceeded every projection, but Daniel remained focused on ensuring that growth didn't compromise the personal attention and authentic support that made their approach effective. Each new program required careful adaptation to local circumstances and cultural contexts, demanding the same kind of thoughtful observation and creative problem-solving that had characterized his years in customer service. Grace's voice joined the conversation through a video call from Oxford University, where she was completing her first semester with the kind of academic distinction that had surprised no one who understood her capabilities. Her dorm room bore the elegant simplicity that characterized everything about her approach to life: functional, beautiful, and completely authentic. "Papa, I wanted to share something that happened in my international relations seminar today," she said, her excitement evident despite the digital connection. "Professor Cambridge assigned a case study about economic development in emerging markets, and when I applied the perspectives you taught me about community-based problem-solving, 3 graduate students asked if they could interview you for their thesis research." The request represented a full-circle moment that Daniel found almost overwhelming in its implications. Oxford University graduate students wanted to learn from the wisdom he had developed through years of working at Rodriguez Corner Market and navigating the challenges of single parenthood in an economically struggling neighborhood. Grace, I'm not sure I have anything to teach graduate students who are studying at one of the world's most prestigious universities. Papa, that's exactly why they need to learn from you, Grace replied with the gentle firmness that had always characterized their relationship. You understand how economic theories actually affect real families and communities. You've seen how policy changes translate into practical challenges for people who don't have economic buffers to protect them from market fluctuations. Dr. Foster leaned forward with the enthusiasm that had made her such an effective advocate for educational innovation. Daniel, Grace is absolutely right. The combination of theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom that your family represents is exactly what academic institutions need to develop more effective approaches to social and economic challenges. The afternoon brought a visitor who represented the most significant validation of their journey's impact. Judge Thornfield arrived with a formal invitation that carried implications extending far beyond individual recognition. Daniel, the Morrison Foundation Board has unanimously voted to offer you the position of Director of Community Engagement, he announced with the solemnity that accompanied major institutional decisions. The role would involve traveling nationally to help other organizations develop inclusive excellence programs based on the model you and Grace pioneered. The opportunity represented a platform for influence that Daniel had never imagined possible, but it also required him to consider whether he was prepared for the level of responsibility and public attention that would accompany such a position. Judge Thornfield, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to ask whether you're certain that someone with my background can effectively represent the Morrison Foundation to academic and corporate leaders across the country. The question revealed that despite months of success and recognition, Daniel still carried some uncertainty about his qualifications for the highest levels of institutional leadership. Judge Thornfield's response demonstrated why he had earned such respect throughout his judicial career. Daniel, the Morrison Foundation was established to identify and support exceptional potential regardless of its packaging. Your background isn't a limitation we're willing to overlook. It's precisely the qualification we need most. You understand what authentic excellence looks like when it emerges from challenging circumstances, and you know how to create environments where that excellence can flourish. As the day concluded and Daniel prepared to return to the apartment that had become their sanctuary, he reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had begun with Vivian Sterling's cruel bet, and evolved into a movement that was reshaping institutional approaches to talent development across multiple industries. The taxi ride through Meridian Heights revealed the visible changes that had accompanied their family's journey. New scholarship recipients could be seen throughout the community. Young people whose confidence and opportunities reflected the same principles that had guided Daniel's parenting and Grace's academic achievement. The Ashford Fellowship had become more than a program. It had become a symbol of what was possible when communities chose inclusion over exclusion, merit over inheritance, and authentic character over artificial advantage. Grace's evening call from Oxford brought news that perfectly captured the global impact their local courage had generated. Papa, I received an invitation today that I think Mama would have found incredible. The United Nations Educational Council wants me to participate in a youth leadership summit focused on developing inclusive policies for international education. They specifically mentioned how our family's story demonstrates the importance of supporting diverse perspectives in academic environments. The invitation represented recognition at the highest levels of international education policy, but Daniel found himself thinking about Evelyn and how proud she would have been to see their daughter's voice being heard in forums that could affect educational opportunities for young people worldwide. Mija, your mother always said that true success was measured by how many people benefited from the opportunities you created. I think she would be amazed by how far that principle has carried us. As Daniel prepared for sleep in the same small bedroom where he had once counted bills and faced foreclosure, he understood that their story was really just beginning. The courage they had shown at Grandview Estate had created ripple effects that would continue expanding for generations, touching lives and opening opportunities in ways they could never fully measure or predict. The bet that Vivian Sterling had designed to humiliate them had instead become the catalyst for proving that authentic character, genuine intelligence, and earned excellence would always triumph over artificial privilege when given the chance to compete on level ground. Their family's grace under pressure had not only secured Grace's dreams, but had created pathways for thousands of other families to discover their own potential for extraordinary achievement. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.